people that have been in this building, public, since March 17th. I think we opened it up one day for a public hearing for like 1 hour. That was it. So we, well, Kevin did. Kevin and Trevor kind of heard the call from the last meeting to do this in person. And so they bent over backwards to make this happen. And I think this is appropriate. We're YouTube video.
I don't think I could get further back in the corner. But
That was not me. That was not me. It is. So anyways, I'm actually kind of excited to see faces and do this. This will be much more covered. So I'm going to call this meeting to order, and we have everyone here except Sue. Hopefully she's on her way. Trevor, do I need motions to adopt? Can I just declare the agenda?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Does anyone have any changes or anything you want to add to the agenda? Okay, I'm just going to declare it. Okay, so there was a couple of information items that were sent out. Pestle and financial scenarios. That was the two things, right? Okay, so we didn't actually put it on the agenda to go through it. We just gave it to you as information. So hopefully you guys all ready. Do you have any questions? See none? Okay, we're gonna move on then. Minutes from our first meeting. There she is.
I am very sorry. I was going to. Okay.
You're locked out?
All good.
You can just text me that perhaps.
I was in the process of texting Dan.
Awesome. Okay, so any changes to the minutes? Last minute? All right, I do need a motion to update the minutes. Go ahead, Jen. So moved by Jen. All those in favor? Appears to be unanimous. All right. Now, is Kelly coming in?
So before they get in here, Mayor Heron actually just had a couple of kind of prompting slides before.
So I'm way ahead of you, Trevor.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so really, you know, today's meeting is really an opportunity to look at problem identification. So there's going to be a couple of presentations, and after each one, there will be an opportunity to ask questions, identify additional pieces of information that the task force might require to help flesh out problem statements moving forward. And then I think the intent is that administration will come back with proposed problem statements at the next task force meeting. Later today too, there will be an opportunity to have a bit of an exercise regarding a vision statement. And then we've also identified some potential kind of quick wins for the task force with respect to development bonds. So this slide here, it just it's kind of a general policy development slide. Again, there's going to be lots of information presented here today. And so really we're kind of in that stage one problem identification kind of red area on the screen here. So again, please feel free to identify additional considerations you might be aware of, or identify additional pieces of information that you may need in order to help define the quote unquote problems we're trying to solve as we move forward here. So just some probing questions. Again, kind of schools of public policy state that in order to properly solve a problem, you first need to properly identify and diagnose it. And so just some probing questions for the task force's consideration today is, what problem are we trying to solve? Define the characteristics, the scope of that, identify any gaps in the data or information, and then frame the problem, define it in a way that identifies underlying causes, not symptoms. So with all that kind of frames it. The first presentation is going to be on social impacts, followed by kind of economic development impacts. And with that, I'll need to now leave the room to let.
Trevor, do you want to go through these, or is this for us to mull over in our heads, and we're going to go through it another time?
Yeah, just for consideration, because there's going to be lots of information here. So.
Do you think we should come back to this slide either today or next meeting?
Yeah, as we start to frame the problems, absolutely.
Okay.
You just fire the password off again, sorry.
Sure, I'll get it. It's small r, 6, small d, small q, large letter E, large letter Z, 5, small letter J.
I'm doing my best, but I actually need to know what network it is.
Oh,
Fine.
fine. I apologize.
Okay.
I gotta do it again.
Tell me when you're ready. No.
No. Bigger letters.
They're little letters, I think. you
They're
said.
little letters,
So the
really
letters
big.
are capital.
Again, sorry, I'm ready. I'm really sorry.
I'm getting nothing but abuse over here, so.
I'm on your team.
Okay, thank you. Small letter R,
Mhm.
6. Small letter D, small letter Q, capital E, capital Z, 5, small letter J.
That's it?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I've been here. It hasn't changed since March.
I know that I worked hard in March. Because I gave all of the heads of
Everybody got it? Everybody got it?
So who went to the market? As Jen? Did you go? Did you go? Was it busy when you were there?
Surprisingly, because it hadn't stopped raining at 2 o'clock like I thought it was going to, so it was busy.
Jen came in. We're waiting for Kelly. Kelly,
Oh.
a free pass, I was going to go down and get a tour. She texted me, she was really cool.
Oh,
They'll come
I
another
see, you got
Saturday.
a pass. I see what you're saying. Maybe. Actually, Natalie was down there and Wes was down there. Yeah,
And Ken said,
Wes had this nice rotary umbrella.
Christine, are the wipes over here somewhere to wipe when we leave, or, oh, it's over there, okay, thanks. Thanks.
was it? Okay, want to introduce yourself?
I think Kelly was.
Oh, Kelly's here.
here.
Are you starting, Kelly?
I am.
Okay.
So the social impact, and I think it's really important, so thank you for factoring that into the overall recovery planning. And it's really important in terms of getting a good picture of the social impact and the current state as we go forward and factoring into that overall resilience of the community and how we go forward in recovery. And how resilient we are as a community, it really is connected to that social, cultural, economic, and environmental sustainability as we go forward. So we appreciate the opportunity to share where we are and how things are going forward. Katrina will be providing a little bit of an overview in terms of where we are and some of the great work and research that has been done and that current state. And she has over 25 years experience, and she's been working directly in municipal provincial governments, and her main focus has been on the social issues and the needs there. So she's got a really good perspective, and hopefully we'll be able to answer some questions as we go forward and provide you with some good information to go forward with.
Thanks, Kelly, and with the lack of access to hairdressers, my 25 years of experience is starting to show. So, thank you.
So was mine.
So was mine.
I'm really pleased to be here this evening to give you some information and some context about the breadth and the scope of the social impacts of COVID-19, both the broader picture, but also the local context and the local stats. I just want to make sure that okay, the technology is always the hardest part. So just to start with, I wanted to talk about the 4 key domains that are really relevant to our conversation today. And that is these 4 elements really do contribute to community well-being. So we have the social profit sector. We also have social connections and informal supports, formal supports and services, and financial stability. Now we know there's lots and lots of pieces we can dig down in that make up community well-being, but just for the context and for today, looking at those 4 key critical areas. And of course, financial stability includes not only a robust economy for businesses and individuals, but also ensures that basic needs are met for people as well. I also wanted to include this. I'm not sure if anyone has seen it. It's emotional response to disasters, and it's adapted from the Disaster Mental Health Services. And it really does speak to how we as humans respond to disasters. And if you think about pandemic or even some of the other ones, the fires, the floods that we've seen in Alberta, you can actually map this out. And so the first part of it is we're preparing. There's a warning and a threat. So if you can recall, way back in February, we knew that the pandemic was potentially coming to Canada. We were watching its impact across the world, and we were anticipating and preparing for it to get here. Then when it came, and we started to see increased numbers, typically what happens is there's a heroic phase. And so people really rise up and they respond to it. And often at that stage as well, we as a community, we look for heroes. And so whether that's firefighters when it's a fire, in this case, it was health professionals, lots of parades outside hospitals, lots of acknowledgement of the work they're doing. And then we hit the honeymoon phase, which again is the whole community really coming together and really saying, we've got this. This is where people say, I can overcome it. They started baking sourdough bread. They started taking up crafts and doing all kinds of things, and just really in that very hopeful phase that they can get through it. Then as time goes on, typically we hit a disillusionment phase. And I don't know about you, but what I've really noticed probably in the last 2 weeks, I've really seen that amongst colleagues, amongst people in my personal life, and also clients, is that people have had enough. They're fed up. They are done with this, and we're seeing increased anxiety and stress being evidenced in people. From there, we end up going through, working through the grief and the loss, and moving into reconstruction. And it's not linear. There are setbacks as we go through. But again, the reason I want to set this context is I know when I've been talking to a lot of people, they haven't really understood why they're starting to feel down right now. And this is the, one of the few times when the entire geographic population, the entire population is impacted by disaster. Usually there's just small sections. And so it's important that we understand what we're collectively going through with this. And this is the way it is for individuals, but it also mirrors the way communities respond collectively as well. So then we get into some of the key high-level themes that have been occurring with this pandemic. So we have mental health and addictions, domestic violence, family tensions rising. There's equality issues which have been amplified, whether that's gender vulnerable groups. We also know that people are reevaluating their priorities, and that's a fairly common impact as well. We know that financial instability is occurring for individuals, but also for business and for governments. So it's pretty widespread. There's social profit sector challenges and social isolation. And so on my next slide, I'll just dig a little deeper into what those mean. So mental health and addictions. We are seeing increased alcohol and drug use. In fact, just in the last week and a half, there's been an increase in the regional ERs, visits due to opioid toxicity. So that's something that has just spiked. We also know that there's been an increase in anxiety, depression, grief, and loss amongst our population. The distress line reports, and the distress line, for those who don't know, is regional, so it does our whole Edmonton or capital region. Mental health concerns was the #1 issue that they are hearing. The Kids Help Phone, there was a 50% increase in text to the line. And One of the interesting stats, last September, the University of Calgary released a study that showed a 1% increase in unemployment is correlated to a 2.8% increase in the province's suicide rate. So we do know that there's a lot of concern when we look at our unemployment rate right now and the impacts on mental health. And interestingly enough, when we look at addiction, there's a really quite a well-known Canadian doctor who specializes in trauma and addictions. And his mantra has always been that the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. And so when we look at social isolation, sometimes we don't really recognize all the emotional, mental, physical impacts that it has. But we do know through research that it impacts mental health as well as physical health, and that social isolation and loneliness are actually associated with depression, cognitive decline, weaker immune system, and heart problems. Distress Line reported that was the third highest topic that they reported that people were calling about. And we know that social isolation and loneliness is typically not solved by professional interventions. It actually is about creating opportunities for informal connections and supports to happen. The next domain is domestic violence. And so typically what happens at the beginning of a pandemic is that there's increased incidents, but decreased reporting. Once again, if you're in a situation with domestic violence and you're in a lockdown or a physical distancing situation, you are in the home with the person who is potentially violent. So we know that isolation increases that risk. There was also, interestingly enough, a 42% increase in calls to our provincial sexual violence line in the first 2 months of COVID. So that was people calling about sexual violence. 8% of Canadians are concerned about the possibility of violence in their home, and 80% of domestic violent victims access support and connection from informal supports versus professional supports. So if they're cut off from family, friends, and neighbors, that decreases their ability to reach out and talk to someone about this. And it was the second highest distress line issue. The next domain is equality issues. So we know through what we're seeing is that COVID and this pandemic has disproportionately impacted women financially as well as with some mental health issues. And one of the reasons or one of the thoughts around that is, first of all, women tend to be in more service sector jobs, which have been lost in this case, and they also tend to be the caregivers of the family. But we also know that our LGBTQ2S+ community have also been isolated from some of their support systems as well, and that has created some issues for them. And there has been, of course, as we know, a spike in racist incidents. However, we know in the last week and a half, there's also been an incredible increase in people rallying against racism. So that's a really positive balance that we've seen. People are reevaluating their priorities. So we're wondering how many people will choose to go back to work full time. There's people who have been home with their children and wondering if they're going to send them to childcare after this, or if they're going to arrange something else. Even people thinking about their profession and what they want to do with their life. Do they want to, spend more time with friends and family? There's been reports that there'll be less consumerism as a result. So those are kind of the issues that people are dealing with. In social profits, there's 4 areas that are generally considered impactful for social profits during a pandemic. And that is community impacts, so higher demands and more vulnerable people happen throughout the community. Operational impacts, so future of some of these organizations are at risk. There's support service capacity impacts, so concerns about meeting the increased service demands, and also funding impacts, because we know that the ways that social profit get funding are all in jeopardy right now. So fundraising events, orders of government, as well as some of the foundations. And then finally, financial stability. And I will only slightly touch on that because I know you have a presentation after me that goes really more deeply into it. But again, there's been widespread job loss or reduction of hours. 29% of Canadians report the pandemic has affected their ability to meet their financial obligations or even their basic needs. Food bank usage has gone up throughout the province. It did drop when CERB was introduced, but it's still higher than a year ago. And we know that marginalized populations suffer greater financial impacts. And when the government programs end, there are certainly concerns with what will happen. So what about, oh, sorry. Yes.
Have St. Albert seen an increase in suicides? Have we actually seen an increase?
So yeah, actually we have. So March 2020, we gave out 411 hampers, which was a 36-year high number of hampers.
And then suicides.
I'm sorry.
Suicide.
Oh, and suicide. I'm sorry. I thought you
We
said
don't
food
normally-
bank.
That's okay. We don't normally see that data, and that's fine. But I'm just wondering if we have some.
We have. Yeah, we certainly have had a lot of calls around suicidal ideation.
Okay.
But we don't have Alberta Health Services data at this time about whether or not with St. Albert there has been a spike. But suicidal ideation, we have seen an increase anecdotally, for sure. The other thing that we've seen or we've heard from Alberta Health Services is that in the first couple of months of COVID, a lot of people with existing mental health issues didn't connect with mental health. And that wasn't just in St. Albert, that was in the region, and I suspect the province as well, just because everybody retracted and stayed with themselves. So what they started to see was a higher rate of acuity going into the ER because people had held off too long. And so they're really seeing an increase in Alberta mental health services in St. Albert as well. And so some of our local stats is Community Village Food Bank. They served 1,230 individuals in March. Now, as soon as CERB came in, their numbers did drop from that, but they're still a bit higher than last year at this time. And they do expect that once that runs out, which will be the end of the June for the first cohort, that those numbers will rise again. They have seen an increase in calls around domestic violence as well. And they have worked with 16 homeless people in St. Albert during this time and helped them find housing.
Is the increase at the food bank or the hampers or the visitors that they're seeing, is it disproportionately higher than the population growth?
Yes, it was a spike in March.
A spike versus last year, or a spike as compared to the population growth?
A spike versus last year, and certainly a spike versus even the previous month. So quite a dramatic spike over the previous month. As far as the ongoing, so the April to April, I'm not sure about that for population growth. That's a good question, and I'll look into that. Because that's only about 15 hampers higher, so that might account for population growth.
We didn't get the, it says March 2020, 411, but we didn't see when March 2019. So
Yeah, it was around 250 to 300 the previous year.
because our population's only went up by 1.4%.
But 1.4% on the big numbers, a number of
That's kind of
people
what we
that could have that would be part of that change.
Yeah, that's good. We'll definitely dig into that deeper. So Stop Abuse in Families organization has 133 current clients. Before they were averaging about 70 to 100. And they have 77 new client requests in April, which is a dramatic increase for them. And they've got an increase in calls from seniors talking about isolation and neglect. Family Resource Center has increased demand for parenting supports, especially for those with children 8 to 16 years. And family stress related to financial issues, navigating schoolwork, and social isolation are also concerns for them. Now, in the FCSS counseling supports, we went into video counseling, and we have seen a 35% increase in counseling year over year. 52% of the calls coming in are related to COVID-19 anxiety, and 36% need financial support for rental, housing, etc. And then the St. Albert Seniors Association, their closure of in-person programs and services, their volunteer driver program was suspended. They have been delivering about 70 to 100 frozen entrees per week to their residents and clients. And they did try a pen pal program, but didn't have a big uptake on it. They thought that might help with isolation. So, and they also have a weekly newsletter that reaches 1,700 people.
Trina, back to the counseling, we had identified an increase in counseling requests coming to the city pre-COVID due to some changes in education funding.
Counseling requests coming from the city, or sorry, from Edmonton.
coming from, mostly from the schools, because some of the councils. are schools.
Yeah.
So I think we might have to somehow identify somehow COVID related, but because Kevin had already put in you're doing a business case for a counselor. Yeah, no, it's pre-COVID.
That was just when COVID started,
No,
for
that
sure.
was,
The need was identified pre-COVID.
we did it because of COVID.
Because of COVID?
Yeah.
I thought it was because of the education funding changes.
No,
Okay. Okay, good to know.
so then a couple of other things of note I wanted to let you know here is that our Child and Family Services also did report a decrease in the reports of child abuse in St. Albert. And again, not a good news story because those kids are not, they're not being exposed to teachers, to coaches, et cetera, who could report if they suspect abuse. And so Child and Family Services is working on seeing how they can reach out more. And also what we heard from youth is that they're really feeling the mental, physical, and financial strain. And they have fear about lack of employment opportunities, but also fear about their futures. And also they have a lot of fear about the amount of debt that Canada is going into. So a lot of worries around that as well.
Before you move off of the slides,
Yeah.
are you hearing, obviously there was a public campaign on food bank as soon as COVID hit. Are you hearing any of the other resources saying we're strapped for resourcing? And are they turning the city, they turned to other volunteer associations for help?
So far, I think what most of the smaller not-for-profits, so yes, the Community Village Food Bank did start a campaign and they were quite successful, I believe, in that. I think some of the smaller nonprofits have just been trying to react and respond and serve clients in a very different way than they're used to. There was some money put out through the province called FCSS Social Services COVID Response Fund. And so a number of our small organizations did apply for that, and our community got just about 63,000 through that. So that's been very helpful. So Safe partnered with Out Loud, and they got a $23,000 grant. We know the Further Ed partnered with a couple of other smaller organizations. They got 15,000. So there is some of that. I think that's one of the things to focus on going forward, though, is because they have been so busy in responding to the need of trying to change how they're delivering their service. We haven't had much time for that.
Katrina? Yeah. One group that we don't seem to see on our usual groups lately is St. Albert Victim Services. And I'm wondering if we have anything around that, because given the fact that there's spikes in all of these areas, you would think that there could be a spike in the work that they're doing. And they're such a quiet organization.
Absolutely.
And they don't get much funding. And I'm wondering if we know if they're experiencing, an increase in, it's just volunteers around the clock, 24 hours waiting for those calls to go and help. So, I'd be interested to know if they're, and really what kinds of calls they are responding to.
Absolutely. And my understanding is they've just got a new executive director. And so we did, that was the email that I got.
They had one 2 years. Really?
No, it's no longer. It's in your.
So we did reach out to them. I haven't heard back yet, but we'll definitely follow up.
Okay. It would just be interesting to know the trends
Yeah.
for them.
Very much so, because they are on the
They
pulse.
hit them all.
Yeah.
They're not specific to a certain thing, so they hit them all.
Yeah, definitely, Councillor Hanson, for sure. Anything else about these? So that's some of the individual impacts. So the impact on social profits in St. Albert, and again, through a series of meetings with and feedback was, of course, they're seeing, many of them are seeing an increased demand for service. They've spent a lot of time adapting their program delivery methods. There are some grants available for PPE for not-for-profits or social profits, so that's a very positive thing. But there's lots of other ways they've had to adapt. They have a reduced ability to hold their traditional fundraising events, so we know several have already already been canceled. That would be an in-person event. We hear that there's going to be a reduction in available government grants, changing technology requirements, and those are often hard, especially if they only have a few staff to keep up to. They've got lots of volunteers and also laid off quite a few staff during the beginning part, so it's going to have to be pulling staff back. And balancing that with also mental health supports for staff. So what we did hear is that there's anxiety about reopening, and also there aren't extensive EAP programs typically for social profit organizations. So concerns about their staff mental health and mental wellness. And they can certainly benefit from some help with capacity building, so help with tech, grant writing, volunteer recruitment. So those are some of the main issues that we hear that they're facing. And then my final slide is just the way forward. And so with all these social impacts, we do know that resilience is an important part of how our community responds, and that is the ability of individuals and community to respond and recover from adverse situations. And so some things for you to consider are planning to sustain continuity and resilience within the social profit organizations, planning to support resilience in residents and their families in response to emergent needs, which includes specialized services that may benefit or help them, and planning to support those broader social or community resilience, which include activities that restore the social fabric and increase informal support networks and connections that are critical. And so a whole society approach addresses the psychosocial needs of the entire population along a spectrum based on the needs that we see. Thank you.
Questions?
Just be real quick, I like the word resilience. Matter of fact, that was what I was trying to come up with at our last meeting, was to try and identify resilience. And so it was nice to see the three challenges, I guess, or recovery implies. But have we given thought to looking at whether they be social agencies or businesses who somehow manage to, I don't know whether ride out is the right term, but they've developed their own resilience somehow. Whether it's through changes in processes, whether it's been through, in some cases, it's basically they go back to core delivery of services or something. But do we know if there are businesses or social agencies who maybe have already developed a model of resiliency or some way to, some learnings that we could get out of something already?
Yeah, I think there are quite a few examples because I think we are very adaptive humans. And so everything from some of the distance counseling or interventions or outreach that people won't have to go back to coming into the office, and those who maybe have mobility issues or childcare issues, that will work better for them. Ways that people have worked together. So when the FCSS COVID grant came out, there were groups who have never worked together who got together. So Further Ed is working with the Jesus Rock of Ages Church and the African Friendship Group because they identified some common areas where they could work together. So I think that absolutely will be there. I think people have become so far more proficient with tech than I know that I was when this started, and I think that's also gone out there as well. Alberta Supports, for example, is not going to have people line up anymore to apply. They get to do it online now, which if anyone has seen people lined up in the winter outside the door waiting to get in and talking to someone. So I definitely think there will be improvements, and I think it's a great thing that we continue to share those improvements with each other.
You mentioned the kids helpline, and I'm just wondering, are we, and that's great that that's there, but what are we doing in St. Albert currently? And are we meeting the needs of the youth that are struggling? Because I know a lot of it was probably identified at school level, and now they don't have that area to bring it forward.
So there's several ways, and I think as with any population, we have to have multiple prongs and multiple responses. So in talking to the schools, what they have done is they've identified those families or those youth that might need a little bit more. So their counselors have been reaching out to them as well. We have, as a city of St. Albert, through our BAM program, and our building assets program. Our counselors are reaching out as well. So I think what we're trying to do is expand the safety net as much as we can. Are we reaching all the youth? No, we're not. And so we'll keep trying to figure out ways that we can and hearing input from people and suggestions.
Has the youth committee been meeting?
I think they've met once, haven't they? On,
Yes, they have.
Yeah.
They're very, they're very excited to keep meeting. Feedback we got this week from Jennifer, who facilitates that group, as well as the BAM, was they are very anxious to keep going and they want to be part of the conversation and they're really creating that connection. So.
For the three interconnected areas, what would be in your view the biggest gap that exists there? Is there a particular barrier to overcome and accomplishing any of that?
you know, that's a good question. And I guess my response would be is that they're so interconnected and they're so important to have all three. So I think there's bits missing in each one of them. And I think that because we do have direct services and that's great. And there are some places where there's not quite enough direct services and we do have people who are really disconnected at the community level. So can we ensure that there are opportunities for them to connect? And then our social profits, I think, are extremely important too. So yeah, I know that might be a, sitting on the fence answer, but I do think all three could benefit.
Little bits and pieces of each culminate into something.
Right.
When you go to the community well-being slide, you talked about the not-for-profit sector and formal supports, which is kind of what you talked about in your presentation, but you also talked about the social connections and informal.
Yeah.
I think this could probably really focus on some of that informal, because we do have the experts working on the block party initiatives and good neighbor, the good neighbor recognition thing. I can't believe how many letters I've written so far. Another one today. So we got to push that a little bit more, and because we're just community members essentially sitting here, we can probably do a good job of promoting community and how we get together. And West threw out the idea a long time ago, but we should have a party this time next year as a emergence out of this, and we can actually stand. But that's something that's group can work on. That's kind of where I was.
But even beyond that, I really picked up on that what you said, that the opposite of addictions is connectivity. Did you say that?
Just connection.
Connection. So there is a lot of work that we could do around promoting that in a very fluid manner. We don't have to wait for a party next year. I think what we need to do is, like you said, create opportunities where people, where things are meaningful for people, they will come together. So it's learning, it's figuring out what we need to identify as important to people and creating an opportunity for people to come together because they need to connect. I think that's, I mean, we know addictions are up. We know sales are up at the liquor store. We know opioids are out and across the province. And I heard that from that provincial meeting I was at. So, maybe that's something we could think about. I don't really know what that looks like, but people around this table probably do. Yeah, instead of always sending them to a safe or calling a mental health line, maybe we get in front of that.
That's prevention.
Yeah, and so that people are a little bit more joyful because they have belonging and a place to go and activity.
Belonging and a sense of purpose, two of the most basic human needs.
We're in the middle of producing a video about St. Albert's response to COVID, and we're using the hashtag TN together. It's going to really make people feel positive about some of the stuff that has happened in the last few months. Can't wait to see it.
Except for the people that don't want to spend any money on that. I've heard, you're not going to make a video, are you? For my taxpayers' money.
Did you hear that Grand Prairie is taking out a lawsuit against the opioid producers?
No, I didn't.
And I think Lethbridge has got a motion in front of council to support it.
Oh, really?
Calgary's doing it. Yeah, that's, I haven't got the details.
Hope that, oh, thank you. No, I
It's
kind of
$10 billion loss to get some of these pharmaceutical companies. Well,
Aaron, just
Yeah.
as we look at the connectivity piece, one thing I think we can't lose sight of is, we have a gym in the River Valley, and I'm fortunate to run there a lot. I've never seen the River Valley that busy in all my life. Yeah, like it's crazy. So I think we need to appropriate that and look at doing something while we still have decent weather to bring the community together to actually do some sort of celebration. I don't know what that looks like. I'm just throwing that out there, but we can't. People are starving for outdoors and they're starving for connectivity together, and we've got a jewel in the River Valley.
It's unfortunate we can't do it in Canada. I think Canada, we choose to try to get people outside, but we outside.
Madam Mayor, just to point out that, I think the other aspect is as some of the facilities and services start to come online, like Service Place, those are centers of hubs and connections that people are just dying to get back to. And, I know even in my world, we're measuring the reopening based on financials and managing those. And we often forget about these intangible health and well-being outcomes that you can't put a price on, but are so important to people's health and well-being and resilience. And, I think it's important as well, not only to create social gatherings and things, but some of the basic stuff that we're trying to hopefully reactivate will help create some of these really important gatherings that people are just dying to get back to. Sense of routine, seeing an old face.
We have no idea when that's happening. That's phase 3. We haven't given us anything. Looking at you too.
Phase 2 probably.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Not for the general public.
Stay tuned this week.
No,
I think it's Wednesday, right? Tuesday or Wednesday, we'll hear something.
Oh, here's something.
We saw that in the farmer's market. I know we were talking about it, right? Just exactly what you were saying, Nick. I mean, they were lined up. They were
In the rain.
in the rain, they were lined up to
Crappy
get in.
weather.
Anything else on the social side?
Good information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good.
In order to make sure to protect the next person.
I think the rate of the drive announcement to wipe the mic into every speaker. And all I did was go up and say, now let's do so, then you have to wipe the mic.
If there are any other questions.
Speak slower. I was speaking voicely.
Speaking nicely is what you just said.
So wrong.
Thank you.
All right. Is Melanie and Sean coming in?
Yeah. Everybody were Trevor.
Did you hear that? Ed wants to open up in the back. It's the flowers. I know he won't show up, or we'll bring us if he comes. I said that to Ed.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Sean McRitchie. I'm the Director of Economic Development Department here at the City of St. Albert. We're here tonight. Melanie Humphrey's going to be giving you guys a presentation about, I guess, the current state of our local economy, just to give you guys some context, I guess, as you move forward, around discovering ways to generate economic activity. So Melanie is going to be giving you the presentation. She's a data analyst here with Strategic Services with the City of St. Albert. She serves mostly internal city departments, one of which is economic development. So she's more than qualified to give you guys a presentation. Her background, she has a master's in science and data analytics, so very qualified to be doing this. And she's going to be taking you guys through a rundown of commodity pricing, how it impacts St. Albert, what kind of the local kind of micro indicators are in our community right now, business licensing, some of the things that we're seeing on the ground. And then if you have any questions, feel free to ask Melanie and myself, and we'll do our best to answer them. Turn it over now.
Okay, and Trevor, should I go ahead and present with these little things up on the side here?
Yeah, that's fine. It's just.
Yeah, that's just the Zoom.
All right, all right.
Here we came up.
There we go. Okay, thanks very much for, came back. Oh, well. Thanks very much for allowing me to be here tonight. I'm looking forward to giving you some good information on the state of the economy. These slides were done before the latest set of statistics came out on Friday and today. Yes, Friday and today. So some of the graphs don't have that data, but I do have all the numbers, so I'll just speak to that. Okay, so we'll start with some macro figures. We'll start with the GDP for, I can't see the part you need to see.
You can move that.
How do I move this
Slide
thing?
that thing to the top, I think.
Yeah, if you could just help me with this little technological thing. I'm afraid to touch it.
I think if you put it to the top, it'll go along the top.
Can't you just hit the flash button?
Yeah, and then just kind of slide it up to the top. That's a good spot for it. Excellent, thank you. Okay.
Or is that right?
Oh, that's much better. Is that better for everybody?
But what about the YouTube drive? What about IT?
He's there. They're just minimized.
Okay.
They're just minimized. We didn't get rid of them. We couldn't get rid of them. They're too important. So as you can see from this graph, after gaining back almost everything that we lost during the big crash of 15-16, we've now taken a bit of a nosedive into a recession at this point. You can see that it's a very deep, these particular numbers are from StatsCan, RBC Economics, and the Conference Board of Canada. You can see that we've got a really deep nosedive, and they're predicting a very V-shaped type recovery at this point. However, that assumes that, one, we're not going to have another reoccurrence like the Spanish flu, and it also assumes that our oil and gas industry is going to stabilize back to where it was pre-COVID. And what we're seeing for 2020, the Canadian gross domestic product decrease would be about 6 to 7% decrease. Alberta overall about 11%. And the Edmonton area, I tend to use the Edmonton census metropolitan area, which is Metro Edmonton. A lot of these stats, I can only get them at that level. So I use Edmonton CMA as a proxy for St. Albert. The Edmonton area is expected to do a little better than Alberta overall at about 5.6% decrease. Let's see. So we know that's going to happen, and we can only hope for that kind of deep V recovery. A little bit about gas and oil prices. This shows Western Texas Intermediate, that's WTI. That's what you see, that's what you hear on the radio most of the time, gas or oil prices, WTI. Western Canadian Select, which is the blue, that's a lot of what we pump out of the ground here or pull out of the ground here in Alberta. It's the steam-assisted bitumen mining, the in situ kind of mining that's being done. There's almost always a healthy differential between the two because the WTI is Western Canadian is a heavier crude that needs to be distilled, pumped to refineries that can refine it. So we have two challenges there. We've got to get it out of the province, have it refined, and then bring it back into the province. And that's all I'll say about that. So the differential is that gray thing that looks like icicles. The longer the icicle,
the bigger the differential, the worse it is for our Alberta producers and the others that produce this type of fuel. We've got the sharp drop is really visible. You can see where it dropped and then they cut production, then it dropped again, even worse. We've got a slight rise in this for the second half of the year. We do have a lot of oil still sitting in storage or that hasn't even been pulled out of its extracted yet because it's not economic to do so. So that's got to move before we can have any genuine increase in production. We're also have to kind of keep an eye on the U.S. shale oil market because their oil is a little cheaper for them to bring out than us. So we have to keep an eye on what's happening in shale in the U.S. as well. The spot price as of June 5th was WTI West Texas Intermediate was $37.50 US a barrel. WCS was $32.81 with a differential of $4.69. To put that in perspective, Cenovus put out their quarterly investor prospectus in April. They said, here's the two kickers. A reduction of $1 billion in cash outlay will result in a break even for modern projects, SAGT, that kind of stuff, of about $38 a barrel, assuming a $12 differential. So the good news is if the gas price or oil prices come up, we will have more producing. The bad news is that's $1 billion less, and that's just Cenovus. So in cash and capital outlay. So we got to be kind of aware of that. So even though we depend a little less on energy because the whole province depends on energy, we have to kind of keep an eye on this too, because as the province goes, so do we. Now for some unemployment and labor force participation stats. These were not available when I made this graph, but I do have the current ones. It turns out that if you want to do, this is for the unemployment rate in Calgary and the unemployment rate in Edmonton from January through April. In May, Calgary was up to 13.4 from 10.8, and Edmonton is up to 13.6, up from 10. So if you can just picture that graph going up a little bit at the end. These are moving averages, which that's a tried and true statistical technique because when you got data that's got a lot of wiggles in it, it can be really hard to see a signal in all the noise. So by smoothing it slightly, you do lose a little bit of resolution, but you don't have all these violent jumps. So what you'll hear in the press is, I think what was the press is the headline unemployment rate in Alberta right now is 15.5%. And I'm saying 12.5. That's because that headline rate is not smooth. That's just the actual unemployment rate for May. We didn't average it out. We didn't try and smooth it out. So that's one of the challenges when you look at unemployment rates is be aware of which one you're looking at because you will hear wildly different ones. But nonetheless, it's not particularly pretty.
How does that compare to Canada?
Canada, let's see, Canada, I have it right here. Yeah, put it in my speaker notes. I have it printed off the table. Because if you ask me to memorize all these numbers, I won't. I'll get them wrong. There we go. Here we go. Canada seasonal with the smooth is 11.5.
As of May.
As of May. Yeah.
So we're higher than average.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the smooth. So it's no, how do you look at it? It's not pretty. Let's see, the labor force participation. Wrong keyboard. Sorry guys. This is labor force participation rate, which is another indicator of what's going on in employment. In the last 5 months, we've lost a lot in the participation rate. Participation rate is the rate of people that are actually working, and it's the number of people actually working plus the people that are actively looking for work. So when your participation rate drops, what that tells you is that people are no longer looking. They're either discouraged, they're, in this case, maybe on CERB, and so they're hoping to get, expecting to get a call back. So participation rate in the Edmonton metro area dropped from 71 to 64.8 from April to May. So that's a significant drop. And Alberta has historically had the highest participation rate in Canada. And our area has historically had a very high participation rate. So when you hear the kind of discouraging numbers about people that just aren't even looking for work, that's what we're seeing in these numbers.
But would some of that be because of the benefits that the feds have been giving out?
Yeah, I whipped past that, you're correct. Yeah, what is Canada unemployment? Our benefit, I can never remember what the R stands for. It's the universal unemployment that you don't have to have the hours. You just say, I lost my job due to COVID, and you get, is it 4 months? Is it?
Yeah.
$2,000 a month for 4 months.
Well, and if you are out there looking for a job or you get a job that's less, it's sometimes better for you to just not do anything. Like it's more certain to stay on this than to go to work.
Right. Hearing from a lot of businesses that the employees are not coming back to work even when they're getting the call.
Because they make more on CERB than they do working, and it's way lower risk. These numbers, it'll be interesting to see what happens in June, because our first cohort are coming off in June. I think Katrina probably talked about this too. The first cohort is coming off in June. So these numbers next month, I mean, we just need to be prepared for different numbers next month, I think. But more businesses will be opening too, so that may change. Let's see. So continuing to look at employment, this big ugly graph shows us what employment, change in employment by NAICS Code of Employer. That's quite a mouthful. What that means is what jobs have been lost in the Edmonton metro region by the code of the company that employs them. So our biggest losses are actually in public administration, healthcare and social assistance. Keep in mind, and this is April, year over year, April 2019 to April 2020. I don't have the May numbers yet. They're on their way out if they haven't come. Keep in mind with that healthcare and social assistance, that's also hygienists, dentists. So it's not just hospital people. We know the combination and food services have gotten hit hard at 9,600 jobs. 9,600 jobs in year over year, because all these hotels and restaurants have had to close. Surprisingly, we've got an uptick in finance, insurance, real estate, rental, and leasing. Yay. And of course, professional, scientific, and technical services. So what I did is, it's not unexpected, but you can really see where we've been hit. So what I did is I took these percent changes, and I took the 19, good grief, I'm showing my age, 2016 federal census stats for city of St. Albert, and took those same percentage drops and applied them to our populace. Not surprising that we saw a big drop in public administration, because of course, keep in mind, that's provincial, federal, and municipal. Like if somebody who works in the city of Edmonton lives in St. Albert loses their job, they'll show up here.
So this is based on, this is based on where they reside.
Yes.
Not where the employer is.
It's where the popular person lives. So what we're seeing, that the difference we're seeing is that we have proportionately fewer residents in manufacturing, oil and gas, and utilities. So those drops are proportionately less. So we may not be getting hit quite as hard as some other areas in the CMA, like Leduc possibly, because we have fewer people that are directly employed in those fields. However, indirect drops will hit us because they're hitting everybody. Strictly an estimate. So the other thing, wholesale and retail trade, we did take quite a hit there, but of course everybody had to close we have a lot of retail, and a lot of those stores had to close.
Question or an observation, it's back to a comment we made earlier.
Oh, yeah.
This is a year over year, so I think the other thing we need to keep in mind is there's been some government reductions from a budget perspective, eventually that is cascaded obviously into public agencies, health services.
Yes, absolutely.
facilities. And so it'd be interesting to see, I mean, it's really neither here nor there, but almost more of a February to April comparison as opposed to year over year, just because they would maybe extract out what is maybe even budget related as opposed to COVID. It's just an option.
I could see if I could pull those numbers, if we would, and try to get back to, get it, I could get it, if I can pull those numbers, I can.
I mean, don't spend a lot of time, but it's just
Okay.
more something we should keep in mind, because
Yeah.
those numbers, especially when you look at public administration, they shrink.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because there were those big cuts in the, in the Alberta provincial government, which is part of what we're seeing here is cuts that were not made due to COVID. Jan to May changes. Okay, so that's what's going on there. And then we decided to zoom in a little bit more to the city of St. Albert itself. And one measure you can use for business climate is new business licenses year to date by year. So it's been pretty steady. I was actually pleased with how many we did have in the first quarter of this year. And of course, keep in mind that that's Q1, Q2, where that's, or I'm sorry, January, February. So that's pre-COVID. So normally we have about, by the end of May, we have on average 144 new business licenses. The total for this time for this period was 103. Generally, we have more home-based. So that's also not surprising. We generally, the proportion of home to bricks and mortar is consistent. The challenge we've got is with the reduction is we lose tax base, we lose dollars spent in the community. So maybe this is maybe not, people may be thinking this is maybe not the best time to start a business. We don't have, and I know that we get asked this a lot. One of the challenges we have is we don't get within St. Albert information on when businesses close, because we run our business licenses from January to December, and we don't give refunds if you close your business. So there's no incentive for a business to call us up in April and say, hey, I'm closing, can I get, 8 out of my, or 6 out of my 12 months back. So we don't necessarily find out until a business doesn't renew that they've closed when we're looking at business licenses. So that is an unfortunate challenge with the way we do licensing.
Communities don't even have business licenses.
A lot of them don't.
So this data is hard to track, so this is good data.
Thanks. Thank Monty. Over in the
Would Jen, would the chamber know how many businesses will start up again and based on
Our renewals are throughout the year, so we'll often find out that a business is closed or is moving if they are not renewing. So we'll sort of hear about it, but again, it's sort of on an annual basis often.
so we won't know how many businesses we potentially lost until end of calendar year.
January, February. Yeah, we won't have a hard number based on licenses till. So one of the things that ECDEV did was they did a business survey in May, and it ran from the 6th to the 27th, and there were 149 responses, which isn't super, but it's nice that they took the time to answer.
I just think we did one and then this was the second.
This is the second one, yes. This is the second one that was done. There was one done in February, March, early April. So this was done in May. So we're seeing, the biggest things we're seeing is a decrease in revenue, 87%, unsurprising. We're seeing the second biggest change is 61% are saying that you can, changes in how your business provides services, because of course we're seeing lots of businesses go online. Cancellation of non-essential work-related meetings, which of course has a trickle over effect into the hospitality industry. But they're kind of closed anyway. One of the biggest one is closing. 46% of them responded they closed a business location or an office, actually closed the office. Increases in expenses if they are keeping their office open, reduced number of business hours, and I just kind of lumped some of the other problems under supply chain disruption. You can't get what you need to do your business, or it's hard to get it, taking longer to do it. So that's what some of the impacts that were being reported. Next thing that we see is what government support problems. We did actually ask, more questions in these, and will the survey answers be on the website?
They're not on our website. So we did 2 surveys. The first one, the results were in the Gazette. I'm not sure if the Gazette has interest in running another story on the second result, but Jennifer has them and they would be available to the group.
Okay, so Jennifer, because I could get it free too, but if you've got it already.
I can send it out.
That'd be
Because
good.
that does want to talk.
When you say closed businesses, or when they close their businesses or their location, they are closed or temporary closed until public health says we can open?
Oh, that is a good question. Do you know how that was
The
worded?
temporary closure was a good question for you, but we don't know necessarily if they're planning to reopen. They told us they were temporarily closed. Maybe 30% of them will reopen after that. But
Okay.
This is 0% gone out of business.
Yeah, but of course.
If you're going out of business, how would you respond?
They didn't respond.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. What was the number that in the last survey, do you remember what the number was that thought that they might go out of business?
Yeah, so the first survey was, I guess, statistically more relevant. We had about 350 respondents, and I think at that time it was just when things were starting to kick off, and I think over 50% thought that they might be in trouble. And then this survey more or less reflected what actually came to pass, like what people are actually marrying right now, and this is what we're about. So it's what they thought would happen is happening. So
And the survey was sent out electronically
it was, yeah.
to every business holder.
Everyone with a license in the city of St. Albert, so that's 2,700 businesses. It went out through our I guess, platforms as well as it was with the chambers.
How many responded?
Yeah, 149 to the second one.
The first one was
350.
50.
And you've done a survey too.
No, we did it jointly.
This is all joint. Okay.
The Alberta Chambers has done one, and they have the results broken down by postal code. So we will get that information for our postal code.
Okay, so what impacts, the next one, what government support programs have you used? SERV is 38% have used SERV, which I'm making an assumption that may not be safe, that these are self-employed.
Well, no, anyone, like for serve anyone.
Anyone, yeah, anyone can use it. The Canada Emergency Business Account. What's surprising is the third highest one is none. That either their business model is such or their financial situation is such that they haven't taken advantage of any programs. The Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, the CEWS, Workers' Comp Board premium payment deferral, and they also did a refund, but I think that it's all lumped together. 10% wage subsidy, utility payment deferrals, and property tax deferrals. Which in particular property tax deferrals, that hits us in the bottom line.
Well, that one's skewed somewhat in the sense that a lot of the businesses who responded to the survey don't own the building. So they aren't entitled to the further property taxes. It would be the actual owner of the facility that they're renting, so a bit of a skew on that.
And we probably wouldn't even know, honestly, because normally property taxes are 30, normal. So we won't know until after that. I'm going to take advantage of the September date.
And in St. Albert, do they have to apply for that or they just, oh, okay.
And then also the rent assistance program, it only came out on, people could only apply as of May 25th. So
Right, so
that number will be much higher.
We have a webinar on that tomorrow. We have about 45 businesses signed up. Businesses and landlords.
that's great. That's great. So one of the things that we talk about a lot, and this is data from the 2016 federal census. We talk a lot about having people leave St. Albert, like you get all these people that get in their cars and drive to Edmonton every day. Now keep in mind, this is pre-COVID. So this is from 2016. They get in their cars and they drive to St. Albert and they shop there and they do all that stuff there. But one of the things that we don't get from the municipal survey that we do get from the feds is we get how many people are coming into St. Albert. So we've got a good chunk of people that come in, like I'm not a St. Albertian. I'm from Edmonton, sorry guys, I drive here every day. But I also shop here now. Like, no, in all seriousness, it's way easier for me to run to the superstore or up to the, wherever on my way home, than get home and then have to go where I used to shop. So, I think, one point there is we have an opportunity when things return a little bit, we have an opportunity to target those people that are commuting in. There's also a much more immediate opportunity to retain money in our community because we've got all these commuters that aren't commuting out. That great big huge green swack over there. Those are people that aren't going to Edmonton right now, a good chunk of them. Is there a way we can keep them spending their dollars here now and in the future? Because that's like an immediate opportunity. So I thought that was really interesting that we've got a chance to look at those numbers when they come out again too. You notice I didn't talk about gas prices at all, but I'm going to now, whether you want me to or not. Gas prices, as we all know, have kind of stayed calm. And forecasts, now all these forecasts are from GLJ Petroleum down in Calgary. They've got a very good reputation. I believe it's who the province uses as well. It shows a pretty low but stable price forecast. Our spot price, we're running between $1 and $2 a gigajoule. The forecast is right now it's $1.49. And it's forecast to rise to about $2. So we've got a very low, stable gas price. So this is bad for the producers, but it's good for people that use gas. You also have to kind of keep in mind that what has continued to depress gas prices is that, as I alluded to before, gas is a byproduct of the shale industry. So when the shale industry was like really cranking it up, they were dumping tons of gas on the market too. Shale has closed up. There's a lot of closed-in oil in shale right now. So they're not producing that byproduct gas either. So that may give us a tiny little bump in prices over the next year to 2 years. Not a lot, but this is stuff, a lot of this capital is actually just, if you can just get the price up a little bit, it'll bring more capacity online and improve the situation. But it's probably not going to rise above $2.50. That's what I'm hearing from GLJ. But herein lies an opportunity, because one of the things with that low gas price, that didn't come out well at all, did it? One of the opportunities that we have is in this map. There's St. Albert is down that little green outline there. That's city of St. Albert. These are major projects near St. Albert greater than $10 million. I did not put them all on here because you couldn't read it. But what I did show is I showed, you can see where the U line's going in. You can see the Ray Gibbon Drive expansion that was just announced, to TELUS fiber optic, the EPC development. But what you're seeing is up in Sturgeon, there's all this additional stuff going on. And one of the things that's going on is there are plants up there that are taking this gas and they're not using it as fuel. It's no longer a commodity. It is a commodity, but it's being used as a feedstock for commercial products for manufacturing because it's economic to do so. And maybe there's for example, like the CKPC, I have to say this slowly, propylene, polypropylene, basically 2 different kinds of plastics. They're coming online, they're manufacturing pellets. Is an opportunity in the long term. Are there opportunities for us to do some of that relatively clean manufacturing here to partner with other things that are going on? It also gives us an opportunity to maybe look northeast, and can we keep developing that northeast area to attract people in that are working on these plants on the northeast side or the northeast side. Sean, did you have anything to add to that? Because you speak.
No, Mr. Pierce probably knows better than anybody, but that low gas price that was on there before, obviously that's not fuel for your car, that's propane, ethane, methane, butane, the different feedstocks for these petrochemical facilities. And that price point makes us globally competitive. That makes us probably the lowest price of long-term feedstock on earth. So the fact that you have, two of these globally significant petrochemical complexes with Interpipe's facility and CKPC's project, within 40 kilometers of St. Albert's boundary, they're the biggest capital projects in the country right now, and nobody seems to know that they exist. So I think that, depending on how this plays out in the future, that could be, there could be downstream opportunity for St. Albert via manufacturing and things of that nature. So there are major projects just off our boundary that, likely we could tie into, if we still felt like it.
There's the appetite. And I think that's all I've got. Anybody got any questions, comments? Any additional stats that you want? What would the process be for them, Trevor, if they wanted additional information on any of this?
Yeah, again, if there's anything that kind of comes up, if you just send an email to Renee, come back to us. Provide information.
Well,
One question.
sure.
So what levers, like I would say a lot of the information there is somewhat out of control, right?
Yeah.
Prices and volatility points. So what areas do you think that this group would be able to push and pull some levers on that might make a difference? I guess that's.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've
That's part of our job, but.
Yeah. Would you want to speak to that, Sean? And maybe I'll.
Yeah, there's a number of examples. I think, one of the things that you guys are going to be talking about next, around development bonds and things like that. I think there's some pretty immediate levers that you may pull to make, say, more competitive from a development perspective. With Range Road 260 and Lakeview Business District and some infrastructure projects happening right now, there may be an opportunity there to make recommendations for this committee to accelerate those or do whatever you guys feel is right. But I think those would be examples of things that this community could probably get going.
Again, just to leverage off of Melanie and Sean's comments on the petrochemical space, I think that is a sweet spot that we can probably look to lever. I know the government is very serious on continuing to develop that space. Given our proximity to the industrial heartland, for a future presentation, depending on where we decide as a group to go, we may want to actually have the industrial heartland present to us. They're actually got a huge wherewithal, and to Sean's point, this is not, I think, a well-known area, but it is global in scale, and it's impressive. And so we should be considering some tools to see where we can actually leverage off of the really good building that's going on there. Billions and billions of dollars.
I guess I'd ask the question, Sean, for all of the industry that is happening northeast of the city, and obviously there's lots of expensive plants and big projects planned. How do we get in there and partner with them? Are they open? Are they looking for partnerships? Are they inviting opportunity?
Yes, so the two plants in question, IPL and CKPC, both of them were recipients of provincial royalty credits through the diversification grant program that the province put out, one to the tune of $200 million and one to the tune of $300 million. And as a part of those credits, they receive local procurement as a big part of that. So catering companies and laundry companies and signage companies and fence companies, like all these types of companies, about there's a threshold that all has to be procured locally. And I would say these companies, both being good Alberta companies, are probably beating that threshold by a landslide. And so I think, and we were working with the chamber before this whole situation erupted, to have the Heartland come and present at the chamber and to engage various stakeholder groups in St. Albert. But I think there is an opportunity for St. Albert. It doesn't all have to go to Sherwood Park, just because that's historically that development's happened on the east side of the river. I would say there's a significant amount of that type of development now happening in Sturgeon County on the west side of the river, with NWR and with CKPC and whatever phase approach they take there. But I think there is opportunity there. It's just a matter of kind of involving ourselves and having a good understanding of what's happening in Heartland and opportunities exist and how they can get into these supply chains and talk to local procurement.
And there's actually going to be a round two, but the provincial government's doing the second round of royalty credits. So there's going to be another big tranche of money going out.
Wanda
Yeah.
was very interested when we were having a discussion about a regional recovery task force. That was good. But he wanted to be on that, so maybe we could get that's kind of leading recovery in this region in this format. So I'm sure he would be very interested. But I think as we go forward, there's an opportunity for this group in the long term to help St. Albert identify sectors that we can target, especially if we get big business district. We're trying to figure out who we're going to incentivize to come and set up jobs. So this, that's Sean's job to kind of translate that too, but it's good timing.
Well, and
Just
then,
because this is
depending on what's happening out at Villanova Airport, there's also, I think, opportunity there too, as it develops.
Yeah, well, I'm
I can attend the next meeting, Jeff, but I'm saying we can. Keep it in mind.
we can respond.
Okay. Anything else? Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure to be able to be here. Thank you. It was really good. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, 5 minutes.
Okay.
That's all I get. Give me a bit of a break. Okay. And I'm assuming Sean will be there too.
So just before we get into the development bonds presentation, and I understand there's a few folks here that we're gonna connect them via Zoom to kind of speak to that as well. But just going back to last meeting and how we were discussing the draft terms of reference and project plan for this group, based on some of the feedback last time, I think we sent a revised version out of both of those documents shortly after the meeting. But we'll come back next meeting with kind of a fleshed out version of the project plan. Again, just taking into account some of the conversation that has transpired today with those ag dev and social impact kind of buckets. But for the purposes of today, we've included in the agenda package the revised terms of reference. Really, the only thing that was changed there was how the group plans to interact with the media. And so we had come up with a process for that. So at the end of every meeting, we'll develop a news release that will go out probably tomorrow. And then the chair will act as the primary spokesperson. So the one piece that's still missing from the terms of reference at this point is the vision for this group. And so after we go through the development bond presentation, there'll be an opportunity to kind of provide some input on what that vision is, and then we'll come back with a project plan and terms of reference next week. So unless there's any questions on that, I guess we'll just think to the next piece.
I just have a quick question with regards to the communication. Does it need to be in the terms of reference of what the timeline is for something to go out to the press, and will it also be shared with the task force at the same time, or can it be?
Yes, it can be shared at the same time, and yeah, we can say we'll get it out within 24 hours.
At the end of every meeting, we'll probably just go on to the signature. Awesome. Hey, is it Murray? Who's presenting?
Okay, so it looks like they allowed more folks.
Murray, yeah.
Cheryl, I think you're muted, but I think we're going to give 5 minutes to our external folks here to kind of introduce and speak to this item.
Okay. There's one big one has to go. So Russ is there?
I just heard there was a question if Russell's there, and yes, I am.
You're not doing the presentation, are you, Russell?
No, I'm here for questions, and I think Murray is working on the presentation. I think he's just joined.
Okay. I see him now.
Good evening.
There we go. Hi, Murray. Can you see us very well?
Yeah, I can see you okay.
Good.
That's too bad.
So are we already at number 8? We're ready to get right into this?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I know John has an excellent presentation prepared already, so I won't try to duplicate what he's built out that you'll be hearing shortly, but thought I'd introduce myself. My name is Murray Epp. I work for Marsh Canada. We're an insurance brokerage, and my job there is to specialize in surety, commercial surety, which really translates to letter of credit replacement opportunities in various industries. So not just development, but also aerospace, mining, oil and gas, transportation. But the application, when you stack the two instruments up against each other, are relatively the same. I'll let Russell introduce himself. He's been an incredible asset in helping us have dialogue with municipalities because of his experience on both the public and private side of the industry. So go ahead.
Sure. Met some of you definitely before, but my name is Russell Dowd. I'm Vice President of Land and Commercial for the Rohit Group of Companies, but I've been working on the private sector in land development and housing development and commercial development for the last 15 years. But prior to that, I spent 15 years on the public side in planning. Last role was as the Director of Planning and Development up in Fort McMurray for Wood Buffalo. Prior to that at Parkland County. And before that with regional planning commissions advising municipalities. So I have been heavily involved in the issue of letters of credit from the public side. And so when this issue came up about supporting moving to bonds, my first comment was, well, I've done this on the public side. Here are these, 4 or 5 issues that if you don't address, there's no point in having this discussion. After getting the overview of this, I believe that there's an instrument, a structure that Murray will talk to you about that can work for municipalities. So I see it working for the private side and working for the public side. And it's my 15 years on both sides of the fence that has led me to be a supporter of this. So I will let Murray carry on.
Thanks, Russell. I think the biggest thing to note is that it started out where a lot of the surety industry would go in and try to prescribe or suggest that the municipalities take on a developer bond wording that they were comfortable with. And what ended up happening with the city of Calgary, which was the first major city in Canada that decided to change their position on acceptance of the bond, is Marsh started to have dialogue aligned with industry. So with the association, which was Build in Calgary, obviously in your neck of the woods, it's UDI and the Canadian Home Builders Association. So those two together also provide a lot of value. And we found that bringing in the associations was important because, first of all, it created an opportunity for the developers to speak their own voice in these discussions rather than just the surety industry or the insurance industry trying to build product that's to our benefit. And secondly, I think that it also allowed Marsh to be agnostic in the process where we're doing this for industry. We're not doing it just for Marsh. And we know that there's going to be other surety markets and other surety brokers that ultimately reap the benefit of municipalities accepting bonds. But I want everyone to understand that it's for the benefit of industry and for the attraction of developer investment that Marsh is heavily involved in this. And our clients realize that, and altogether it's a collaborative effort. One thing we did with the city of Calgary when we first went in is we didn't slap a bond form on the table and say, you should accept this. We sat down and asked them, what's your appetite for risk or your parameters of risk mitigation that will make this work? And the city of Calgary, that was a little more long drawn out, protracted process. And I'm pretty impressed with how fast the city of St. Albert is working on this and how fast things are moving, frankly. But it took them time to go through the document, understand what we were trying to present. And then we had to craft it based on their appetite for risk, which is why the sample documents that you've probably looked at, the city of Calgary, the city of Edmonton, are close in format, but they do heavily resemble a letter of credit. And I know John's going to go into more detail about how if you stack the two instruments up against each other, they're comparable. I know since we went with the city of Calgary and made some traction there, and that was low-hanging fruit for us just because my colleague Fraser DeWall and I lived there, and at the time Fraser was on the Build board for Calgary. Now he's on the provincial, the Build Alberta board, and we've sort of spread our geographic footprint a little bit. We've talked to the city of Winnipeg, the city of Vancouver, city of Edmonton's already accepting bonds, city of Calgary. Airdrie is in the one of the municipalities that is accepting bonds. We've spoken with the city of Strathcona, and Russell's been there along the way for most of these discussions, and his perspective is excellent. One of the things John's going to touch on during the presentation is what's made this a huge win for a lot of the developers is the capability to replace existing letters of credit with bonds. because then it becomes an actual immediate liquidity event. And that's when it's the most benefit to the municipality as well. As Russell pointed out to me along our various presentations, is that as soon as the developer can free up any cash, that means that should there be any hiccups in relation to the development, that cash is available to help finance them through any problems or difficulties. So there's benefit directly to the municipality when we do actually issue these bonds and free up cash. Some of the municipalities wanted to wait until the a new development occurred, and then the new call for security could be bonds. But we've clearly learned that the biggest win for developers themselves is when it's you go back in time and replace existing security that's already in place. So I know I've rattled on a lot, but I think John has an excellent presentation, and I'll pass the mic over to him.
Thanks, Murray. Don't know if the slideshow can be pulled up on this one, Trevor.
Yeah, if you share your screen, John, that probably works.
Okay. See what I will do here. That come up?
Yep.
Perfect. Thanks, Murray. I appreciate the strong lead in there. It really works well for me. My name is John Reed, Manager of Development Engineering, and I'll be going over the option and recommendation to introduce the use of development bonds for City of St. Albert. Right, change the page here. There we go. So a quick overview of what we'll be discussing is basically what does the city currently use for securities? What do we need to, why do we want to introduce a new option? What are these development bonds in a little bit more detail than what Maria said? And then what does the city need to do to allow developers to use these bonds or to convert over? And then what do we recommend? So current security options we have are cash, security or certified check that's in the city's name, which is pretty much cash, and letter of credit that's also in the city's name by an accredited bank. And then they're detailed to the council policy. So the securities are there to ensure that if a developer defaults on their contractual obligations with the city, then the city has the option to use those funds to complete the work that was intended. I'm probably running through this real quick here, but I'm a little nervous. So while the current forms of security are very low risk for the city and an acceptable practice in industry, there's been a push to use these alternate forms of security. Reason for it is developers must put up 100% of the value forward for current types of security. So in our case, that's engineering costs for construction is 20% and 100% for landscaping. So that can add up quite to quite a large amount at the front end of a project going forward. So it becomes a barrier for development to happen. And then with the length of development, that means that it could take up to 5 years for the whole process to be complete before those developers receive those securities back. So as new agreements are entered, it calls for more capital to be front-ended. As COVID has stifled home buying somewhat, there's a hesitation for developers and others to build in new areas. If the use of development bonds is allowed, this will be able to free up the capital of the developers and help them push for more options with regards to their developments. With more developments being built, the city's tax base increases, then this can be seen as a win-win for developers and the city. Another reason for this to follow this path is to increase our competitiveness in the regional development industry. So City of Edmonton has just introduced this option to the development industry, as well as Calgary and Grand Prairie, just like Marie had mentioned. It is important to note there's definite attractiveness for developers to not have to have their cash flow tied up in letters of credit, as this will allow less requirements up front for the capital to get their developments built. So what is this development bond? It's basically an insurance policy, just like Murray said. It allows the developer to pay a fee to a surety bond company that will give the funds to the city if the developer defaults on their contractual obligations. Well, there's some small risk, as Murray mentioned, and some concerns from initial points of view with using sureties. The security or the risk is kind of minimized through the language, and we're using City of Edmonton's language or building off of them. And then the benefits to the developer in doing this are that they do not need to have all of the funds available in cash for security on the development. With the development, security is also tied up for numerous years and reduced over time. So if the developer did not need to have this included, they would have more capital funds available for further developments. So here's a comparable table here. And this is more for the long-term situation, not immediate, because there are some immediate things that need to be accomplished. But for long-term, all forms of security in this sense are liquid, and they are to be cash in the hands of the city with the agreed upon notices. So our letter of credit currently indicates a 5 business day notice to the developer prior to drawing on the funds, while the City of Edmonton's current language notes 7 days for the surety bond. So not much difference in that for us to draw on those funds. The developer does not need to put up as much capital at the start of development and therefore has more cash on hand to develop either large areas or more developments. The big payoff for the developers would be for allowing, just like Murray said, to convert the existing letters of credit to a development bond. That'll free up quite a bit amount of cash. And just for reference, we have in our credit account right now is about $30 million. So if we were to free up some of that funds for developers, that's a huge amount of cash up front. But once I get more further into it, you'll understand that not all developers will be able to actually obtain a surety bond. So that'll come up here. But no matter which method is used, the same processes would be followed on the administrative side. So after everything, all the dust is settled and after everything's converted, it's the same process internally. So there's no extra requirements for the administration to complete the drawdowns or the implementation of surety bonds. So the city does not do a complete review of the developer's finances to see if they have the viability to complete their obligations under the agreements. We just take our letter of credit and go with it. So the city kind of leaves that up to the developer to be able to fund their amounts. But the surety bond company will be a little bit more intensive in their review of those companies because they don't want to take that risk and they want to mitigate that risk to the surety company. And it can be expected not every developer will be able to obtain a surety bond. So this level of review the city does not complete will be mitigated by the surety company. And once again, only financially viable developers will be able to obtain that surety. While there's little to no risk in each category of the city, keep in mind there's a risk with using bonds, but that is a kind of ridiculous risk where the bonding company defaults at the same time as the developer defaults. The same would be if a bank defaulted at the same time as the developer as well. It's not unheard of, but it's quite unlikely for both to go down at the same time. So what does the city need to do to allow development bonds? Upon approval of the concept by council, administration has to look into updating the city council policy CP&E 03, letter of credit and security, with the language needed to allow use of development bonds. We'd also have to update the standard template for the development agreement to include the ability to use development bonds as a form of security. We would also have to update our internal processes, procedures with the language required to have the execution of that. And there will be some extra time required to update as well from the conversion of the current letters of credit into bonds. Now, with that conversion, we'd have to work on exactly what a dollar amount is because we don't want to open the floodgates to have every single developer request every letter of credit converted to a bond, because that could tie up our administrative abilities for quite a while. So we would have to work with a reasonable amount in our amounts that we have right now and work with the developers on which ones would be best to convert over. Usually a dollar amount we're thinking, but I don't want to say the number because it's not confirmed yet whether that's reasonable to the developers and to the city. So the recommendation is that the city implement the use of development bonds to the city of St. Albert with a timeline for this summer for implementation. This is a win-win for our situation for developers in the city. There's little to no risk for the city to allow this to go forward. There's no extra cost for administration to allow this to proceed. The city would be following the larger cities and would also be ahead of other smaller municipalities, giving us an economic edge and jumpstarting the economy. It's anticipated this will be using the steps the city of Edmonton has followed, and is recommended to allow developers to convert their current letters of credit into development bonds with some limitations and parameters to be considered as part of the amendment. And any questions?
So just as a matter of process too, just to clarify things, is I believe John is looking at bringing this forward to City Council at a future meeting for decision, but wanted to take the opportunity today to run it past the task force, get some feedback, and when it goes to council, if the task force is supportive of this idea, that will be part of that report.
Yeah, I think any anything in the city, stuff that's COVID related, we'll try to get them to speak, just like the public hires that didn't have time, but thank you for those of you that didn't give your feedback on that, possibly. Did I hear Air Tree's already doing this?
They're working at it right now. They're implementing it, is what Maria had said.
My goal is to beat them.
So,
Okay, Jen and then Al.
Why have we not looked at this before?
We've talked about it. We've discussed it prior to this. The reason why we haven't gone this way is because the amount of involvement with regards to the discussion with the surety companies and the review through legal on updating the actual document had not been done. As I'm a part of a group within the city of Edmonton region municipalities, Edmonton was leading the charge in doing this, and they have a lot more resources available at their hand. So they were leading the charge, and we were following up with what they were working on.
So it took Edmonton 2 years to develop this. And it wasn't really being done for COVID. They were getting ready to do it pre-COVID. So, they've been very good. We've been collaborating with them. Basically, we can use their stuff, so to speak, and get this launched in a month. But if we'd taken this on, it would have been 3 or 4 years with our resources.
Thank you. Alan?
Thanks. So would one of the intent, like if you took somebody off of a letter of credit and replaced it with the bond, are you looking for that developer to take that money that's been freed up and reinvest it into some other development project or in the municipality, or does it disappear into a neighboring municipality and all you've done is converted it and helped them through inflation? Not that that's a bad thing if they're teetering, maybe.
Probably a little bit of both, but we would hope that they would reinvest it in St. Albert, particularly if we have the opportunity for the surety bonds that the other communities don't.
Russell, do you?
Yeah, I can add a comment on that. The one great anchor that you have with developers is our land isn't relocatable. So if we have land in a municipality and that municipality can work with us, the chances are, yes, that money is going to be reused where we have land. So if we have land in, St. Albert, we have land in Strathcona County, we have land in Edmonton. If we've got the ability to work, could free dollars be used in the different municipalities? Yes, but the issue is I've got land, in St. Albert, and if it's easier for me to do business in St. Albert, the likely reinvestment in St. Albert makes more sense for me. So money tends to follow where money can work most effectively. And our land is already where it is, and it's not like it's mobile.
And is the thought that this would speed up development if it freed up cash?
No. What I would say is that development will still depend always on a market, that we have a market availability. But our situation is our threshold for a next development is very much tied to our financial situation. So if you've got a stage of development that is sort of on the bubble and your financial terms are improved by what you have to put up for in terms of security, your ability to continue on with development in a more precarious situation may work. So where I might require under certain circumstances to be 80% pre-sales for development or 100% pre-sales to builders, maybe I could move forward on a stage where I only have 50% pre-sales because I could meet a different financial threshold. I think quite often though, we end up talking about this always in terms of residential development. And what I would encourage you, this has some real opportunities on industrial development. Industrial development is much more challenging because you don't necessarily have the pre-sales that happen with the residential development. And so this is a situation where a credible body with a credible track record or whatever can be able to move more effectively in certain markets than others with having reduced security requirements. Or not reduced security requirements, just an alternative tool. The security is the same, just an alternative tool that reduces the financial impact. So too often, I think we always think of development in terms of just the residential side of the development, but it's very challenging to go forward with industrial developments and commercial projects. And this can certainly be something that is helpful to those developers.
One more, does the developer pick up the cost of the bond?
Yeah, there's a fee, and that's something that Marie can speak to more. There is a fee associated with the bond that the developer pays. It's similar in fee to what you would pay as a letter credit, potentially a little bit more competitive, which gives us more opportunity to save on some costs. The real issue is the amount of money that is not having to be tied up associated with a letter of credit. So that's really how we're more effective with our dollars. And that's something that Marie can probably share on a little bit better, you know, how it affects a developer. But it's that available funds that you have to work on your project. You're just being more effective. So if your letter of credit, in some cases, if a municipality is asking for 100% letter of credit, your total dollars committed to a project is double what it actually appears to be. So you might be doing 10 million of work, but you got $20 million tied up. If that letter of credit's 50%, well, it's $15 million tied up. If we're working with a bond and we have a good track record, that if we're doing $10 million worth of work, well, maybe I'm 10 million and a couple $100,000 associated with the fees, whatever, for getting the bond in place. So it's much more effective use of capital for us.
Sure. And just further to that point, there is cost savings for most developers, probably in the range of 20 to 30% when you compare with a bank instrument or a letter of credit. But the biggest win is that it is a credit engagement, but it's off balance sheet and it's unsecured. So it doesn't affect debt covenants or any covenants with the project lenders. It's purely an arrangement that's subordinate to all the arrangements with the secured senior lenders. And that's the real benefit to the developers, is that they get an extension of credit without tying up capital or security.
Is it up to the developer then to pick the surety company, or is it something that the municipality would have some input in, or is that just up to the developer entirely?
I would suggest that the municipality shortlist acceptable surety companies. I think that, you know, just like you would acceptable banks, you have to set some low watermark or threshold, or even develop a list that you know, industry could provide guidance on, just to make sure that you're dealing with reputable and viable sureties.
Yeah, just to add to that, the last thing I would want would be a municipality to allow any different surety company and perhaps have this tool be spoiled by having a poor quality company back a surety and have a problem with this. So I think in the industry, we only want to be dealing with the best of the best, because it affects our ability to go forward and the viability of this tool. But certainly municipalities should look at like a credit rating and have a rating and say these agencies are acceptable. And I think that would be fine for our industry, and it would be good for the municipality as well.
For reference, the city of Edmonton has an A- minimum rating required for them to actually use that surety company.
I think everyone's gonna do that. Jeff?
This question may be for Kevin, but have we talked to the Economic Sustainable Advisory Committee about this yet? No? Is the plan to do that at some point in time, or just?
This came up real fast.
Okay.
We can do that, or we can bring it forward by the end of June for council approval and make it happen. So we're actually really fast tracking this. It only emerged about 2 to 3 weeks ago.
Okay. Maybe somebody would want to have them. You said on that, right, Dan? Okay. Would this be interesting to have more?
No, I think it would be a constant conversation. I think it would slow the process down. I think you're going to get the same result whether you talk to the board about it or not.
Okay.
For the committee part, I think you're getting the same result.
So the purpose of bringing it here is really just to see if we should push it forward to council. It requires policy changes, as was pointed out earlier. So just looking around the room, receiving, no, look at you.
No, it's a really good initiative, but I would say it's probably, like, to your point, it's really not COVID related at all. So like, I think it's nice and good to be talked about at this level, but I think if there was no such thing as COVID, this is for sure the direction we should
Coming
go.
just is it a stamp of next step?
Yep. Yeah, that's good.
Well, Yeah, I can see what you're saying there, Steve, but at the same time, I mean, if this, I mean, certainly if developers are feeling the pinch of some of the economic downturns from COVID, and if this is a way to change that landscape so that it potentially frees up some dollars that you could then have access to continue on with your build. I mean, recognizing what Russell said about market.
Yeah, like
I
the
think
market will still drive.
The market still drives it, but at the same time, you're not looking at 80% now. You might be able to look at 55% sellout in some areas and say, you know what, now maybe we have a little bit more liquidity that we can actually move forward on some of these things that we wouldn't have been able to do until 24 months from now.
Right, yeah, it's for sure a tool.
Yeah.
And it was fast tracked because of COVID. You're right. It might have happened, but without fast tracked it. Wanted you guys to see it. So I'm not seeing any.
Not too much downside.
Yeah. That's it.
It's about liquidity.
Awesome. So that's coming to those infrastructure.
That's a scary guy.
No, I don't think it's, well, that's tomorrow, right?
Did we
Who
get
let
Zoom?
Rick in here?
Who let Rick in? Did we get Zoom?
Hey, Rick. That's good. Okay, you know what? So it's 8:00 something, 8:03. We're supposed to end at 8. We still have the vision on the agenda. And roundtable and idea generation. Is everyone okay with another half hour? I'm normally pretty good at any meetings right on time, but this was a stuff meeting. So lots of stuff going on.
Is there anything to wrap this up so these guys?
There's no wrap up to this. Can we just go to the next step?
I'll talk about it agenda planning, because again, if we, for the committee, it will be July, right? So we may talk about
Oh, yeah. Oh, we don't have the policy changes drafted up yet. Okay, go to council. All right, moving on, Trevor.
Can you get Rick's face off of the front of my screen?
Thank you, Rick. See you guys. I'm totally gonna have to tell it to you.
All right, so yeah, as I mentioned before the development bond presentation, we've got the vision statement is blank still in the terms of reference. So just wanted to quickly ask, what are 3 or 4 words or phrases that come to mind when you think about what contribution should we be making to help St. Albert recover? What do we want to achieve? What is the future we are moving toward, and what do we envision for St. Albert businesses and residents? So Mayor Herron, maybe I'll just open it up with that. If different task members have 3 to 4 words or phrases that.
Okay. I'm actually just gonna go around our, do you want each bullet separately, or which member to answer all 4 bullets?
Maybe you could just focus on the bottom bullet, what are the 3 to 4
just the 3
words or
words,
phrases that come to mind, and then we'll flesh out kind of a normal wordsmith version.
Okay. Prosperous. Turn it down.
What do you want to envision for sound? I think it's a reconnection. I think it's getting people reconnected to our businesses. Maybe I would add physically reconnected to our businesses. I think we sometimes forget, the consequence, the successive consequence that happens when you pull someone out of a building, whether that be a retail store or a business. What happens when I have employees not in my place of work? What other businesses are they not supporting in St. Albert when they're working from home? So I think it's important that we look for some measure of reconnection.
Awesome.
Not so much sure if this is a what versus or how, but two phrases that come to mind for me are for this committee, that we become a catchment pond for the social and economic ideas on the recovery, and that we are the catalyst for the community to move on those ideas. So again, it's probably not so much it's more of a how, but those are the two phrases that seem to
I wrote down the collective, so I'm sure we think about that entire ecosystem, I suppose, and fortitude.
Just to add to what Dan said, the reconnected it to business and to community. It's not just the businesses, but we talked about that earlier with the depression and the anxiety of people not feeling connected. I wrote down resiliency, addressing immediate needs and recovery, key components to restarting the economy, and competitiveness. Long-term opportunities to build our economic strength.
Couple of thoughts is around like children, youth, and families and businesses thrive. There's a lot of words in here. And experience sense of belonging and well-being. So getting back to some of those. The resilience and the well-being, sense of belonging. The other thing is my concern around everybody has the opportunity. And again, just kind of what's relevant today is this respect for diversity and inclusion. So I got a lot going on in my head.
That's good. So you're skipping right over. I think we should focus on the fact that St. Albert's an amazing place to live. I think we talk a lot about businesses and what businesses we can target and how to like create this business uprising, but I think that residents create the uprising. So there are a lot of communities around St. Albert, other municipalities, not pointing fingers, but some are going to make mistakes through this recovery, and they're not going to get it right. And so I think the more people we can draw to St. Albert, businesses will grow from that and tax base will grow from that. And I know a lot of people don't like the expression like rising tides floats all boats, but like the more people, the more everything good.
Eddie, I too have resiliency. Also innovative and future state. And the thing about future state is we have the opportunity to solve more than just the immediate, depending on the course of action that we take. So I think that future state that goes beyond the immediate recovery and takes us a little bit further. Nick used the word thrive, and up until that moment I hadn't thought about it, but what I like about that word, or thriving, is that it's not just business, it applies to community as well. And it's a word that's transferable to both. A lot of the things we talk about fall into one category or the other. And the more words that we can put around this that match across the board, I think the more effective it's going to be.
I agree.
Well, I had said prosperous, but not prosperous just in the sense of business, but really prosperous in the sense of community. But I really like the words like, I had resiliency down too, so, and I like thrive as well. So, and I also put down strengthening our community. So I guess maybe I'm not articulating it right, but I am. What are we going to move towards? So what is our future going to be? And I think it's always strengthening. It's always improving. It's resiliency. It's recovery. And I don't think we want to lose the word recovery, but that's a very end. That's a word that has a sort of an end statement to it. So it's like we're moving towards recovery. We don't really know what that looks like. So I think everybody's hit some really big words of, we need to be welcoming. We need to be inviting. We need to be strength of the community.
3 or 4 words.
Well, anyway, there you go.
Nobody expected that today.
She took yours.
She did.
Go ahead.
I really have to go ditto to a lot of them. I have recovery. I have leveraging valuable insight from this group of stakeholders. I have connectivity. But then maybe not so much a vision, but I have an action plan. I think we have to make sure that there's an action plan arising out of this. And then I have, I guess the only one that I haven't heard so far is advocacy. And I think that's pretty much everything else is said.
Besides what's already been mentioned, I've had innovative, and I had adaptability. I think our community needs to be prepared for change. And change is so hard for some, but I think we need to be able to adapt to whatever we look like, whether it's exactly the same as it was this time last year or completely different. We have to be ready to be adaptable. And I think the municipality needs to be able to support that adaptability and prioritize our support to those willing to adapt. Honestly, I hate to say it, but if you're not willing to adapt and the world has moved and changed, then it's hard for us to support. So I think we're gonna need to- so that was the only one I had that was not mentioned.
Can I add?
Yeah.
Can I add?
Please do.
Sustainable opportunities, I think it's important. And also collaborative. We're working.
Collaboration. I think evolution fits in almost more than adaptability. I mean, this is forced evolution.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
This is exactly defined as both evolution.
So Troy, what are you gonna do with all this?
I think we will start with one of those kind of word maps and then go from there. So yeah, this is great feedback, and we'll try to come back to the next meeting with kind of a fleshed out vision statement for this group's consideration.
Okay, I can't see my agenda anymore. So, and then around people. I guess this is kind of the time now that the city spent 2 meetings essentially talking to you and giving you kind of a work plan in terms of reference and then the impacts of the 2 different sides of the coin. Sort of forgotten about the environment and all this. But and so now it's kind of tasking you guys to start talking about your idea generations, quick wins ideas you might have, structure that this entire task force might take on. Honestly, this is turning it back over to you guys. And I think about anyone, but I've heard a few ideas, but I think we need to, this is where you guys do your research and bring it to the group. So for example, we were going to talk about today whether there's not enough time, and it sounds like it's going to be a little bit more expensive than we thought, but City of Toronto partnered with Google, Trevor, to do Shop Here, they're calling it. It's about getting support for smaller businesses to create websites. So we were going to become part of this, but anyway, so Google Toronto Shop Here and see and read about it while you're gone and see what you think. And the city's going to do a little more research as well. We lost our Shop Local campaign. It's actually called Love Local. So this is a good chance for you guys to give your feedback on how that campaign will look. So I'm opening it up, and I'm not going to pick on people, but go in whatever order you want. Just start throwing ideas up.
I don't want to, get caught up politicking, but drive-in website opportunities back to businesses pulls people away from the businesses. If there are less people walking through the front door of any business, it has negative impact, long-term negative impact. Maybe some short-term gain. I can recover, some of what I've lost, but it doesn't allow me to build from here. I have to have people walking back through our doors. Yeah, service has to be open. You know, every store on the strip has to be open. Every business in Campbell Park has to be open. Otherwise, we will suffer long-term consequence.
And I agree with you, but I think there's some habits that have been developing because of COVID, and I'm thinking curbside pickup. You know, if we can convince residents to not go to Amazon, but go to the Staples website and say, you know, they're going to be a little bit extra time because they have to drive there and pick it up, but it's way more convenient. It's like shopping online its own thing. So I mean, that there's a
yes, and I think that that's buy online, pick up in store. It's an acronym for it. So, you know, if we could create an opportunity for someone like that to, you know, we could partner with Shopify. We don't necessarily have to partner with Google. Google lags a long way behind in marketplace. I mean, the true leaders in marketplace are the big A, right? But we could partner with Facebook or Shopify, who are now, you know, on the coattails of Amazon marketplace. Google is still lagging behind, which is why they're putting themselves out there.
There's also Shop St. Albert that's owned by
Brad
a
is
local
yeah.
couple who are, and they have actually just partnered with Shopify.
Yeah.
And they are here, they are going out and knocking on doors and talking to the businesses.
Is it their delivery service?
But their website.
Oh, okay.
So they take,
Online.
yeah, they'll take your Shopify information and richen it so that it is searchable or crawlable, so that we can have a Google crawling, you know, Shopify sites. So when we sell Shopify, we're a Shopify partner, a development and a retail partner. So when we sell Shopify to someone, whether it's a point of sale or website, you know, we then add on service like Shop St. Albert that then takes their items and makes them crawlable.
And they're here.
Yeah, they are here.
Google's not here.
Right.
When somebody had suggested publicly on Twitter, Rob Lowisher said that, you know, why don't we have a St. Albert delivery service? St. Albert delivery service. So instead of using Uber or whatever, you know, serve St. Albert businesses, pick it up at curbside and bring it to your house. But that was wrong. That's one idea. So
I think like from a shop local, like, I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say, but a number of people have said, oh, you shouldn't go through skip the dishes because then they take a cut and blah, blah, blah. I think like the free market, like the business world has to figure that out themselves. Like, I don't think we should try to undo the conveniences that people are drawn towards. Like we shouldn't, to run a successful business, you need to meet your customer where they're at. And if they're at home and they don't want to leave their house, we shouldn't try to guilt them into being like, but you should go to Staples instead of Amazon. Like, I don't think that's the best. Like, I don't think that will win. I think Amazon will still win, or Uber, or Skip the Dishes, because they have that figured out. And so I don't know that this task force can kind of get into trying to advise businesses how to like rerun their business to ensure this kind of local selection. That's just maybe devil's advocate, but I keep hearing that, and I think like, we're not going to figure out a way to outsmart Skip the Dishes in favor of like a small mom and pop restaurant in St. Albert.
Right, but I think that we can lean harder on economic development to educate the community. I don't think we do a good job of educating the community. I don't think our community has any idea what $10 means to a local business.
Agreed.
In relation to what it means somewhere else. So I think the webinars that Sean has started to do is a good thing. I think you saw the respondents. We need to be offering more information on how businesses can access the funding that is available that will not continue to be available. You know, you saw that list of how many people did not access wage subsidization. That's crazy. It's crazy. It's difficult. I mean, it's cumbersome, but we should be giving them that education.
On how to get the subsidy?
Absolutely, how to get the wage subsidies. I mean, the response was very low. It's because it's complicated. I mean, look at the rent assistance. That's going to be
It's a messy.
That's gonna be a tougher one, but the wage subsidy is easy. We just have to teach people how to use it. And maybe there's a hotline that we can have. It's not, it is regionalized. It's not the Canada or the Alberta Chamber, but it's the St. Albert business hotline.
Seriously, any topic, any ideas?
So I want to go back to the petrochemical play, industrial heartland. I know that's more of a medium to longer term play, but I think that's a big potential flex. Whether it's additional manufacturing that can spill over from there. I actually do think we should get the industrial heartland to present to us, see where they're at. Government is on round 2 of their petrochemical diversification program. So I think that's something that's, you know, big magnitude, order of magnitude dollars in the area.
Artificial
Intelligence, yes, so that's another play. I'm not sure where provincial government's at, but I think actually getting the institution here to have a presentation on spillover effect. We do talk about Google defines its first North American beachhead in Edmonton because of the artificial intelligence community. So I think that's something we should look at. Again, medium to long-term play, but I think these are important pieces to start planting the seeds around.
We have such a good, honestly, a really good working relationship with the city of Edmonton. And I know the city of Edmonton is always talking about they're ahead on artificial intelligence. I don't think they would just, this competition.
But even the seeds to plant, like the medium to long term, like if that is an area, petrochemical and artificial intelligence that's going to, in the future, potentially generate more jobs in the province, we'd like those people to live here, even if they don't work here. So if that's part of that equation as well, I mean, the industrial heartland is, like, I don't know if there is spillover or if they have enough land and resources in that area, but at least this is a nicer place to live than the area around the industrial heartland.
The downstream stuff.
Yeah, right, like the trickle down.
We have to look at things like that for resiliency. So, you know,
We've had conversations in this council with the St. Albert ready for this one tax. Kind of doubt it, but.
but that's that comment earlier about the change, right?
Yeah.
If you just say we're going to be what we are for the next 20, 30, 40 years, then we'll be left behind without somebody else will fill that void.
The residents will continue to complain about the taxes.
Exactly. Oh, they complain about their taxes, this job too, I'm sure.
Kathy, I want to know how granular we want to be, really. Like I get emails from residents.
Yeah.
And Sandine and I both attended the seniors advisory, and I'll let you talk about the curbside pickup and what that means to them. But I want to go back to like PPE. We have a lot of services in this city of ours, whether it's hair, nails, chiropractor, whatever, that require this PPE, and they're going to require it long term. I had a resident email me and say, could City of St. Albert have a business that prepares PPE here, have a St. Albert logo put on a small side of it, St. Albert, and let the not-for-profits buy it for a nominal fee and let them sell it for, buy it for $1, sell it for $2, and start to pump a little bit of money into our not-for-profits that talks about St. Albert, because that is a need. Our businesses are scrambling for PPE, and the government keeps saying that we've got enough, but it's not easy to come by. And I think, if we've got businesses that are innovative that can pump this stuff out, we can partner with them, put a logo on, get it out in the community, make a little profit for the not-for-profits, things like this. And so she wanted me to bring that here to say, we need to boost our not-for-profits. How can we help them? Because they're not going to get the grant money that they're. So is that a little way that we could do that? The other thing is the rent subsidy that we talk about. A hairstylist
is whether they're having trouble or they don't fit into the box that vets have around rent. She's also got hairstylists that rent from her their chairs. And there's those people fit nowhere into that program, or at least she thinks they don't. So I think there's some information, as Dan talked about, that we need to clarify and be able to answer to our businesses that can help them. I mean, we can keep saying, oh, that's federal or whatever, but we should at least be able to help them with the conversation so that it's not just symptom for them. So, you know, these are things that I think the PPE thing is a quick win. I don't know who could make that in the city, but I'm guessing if Trudeau can find people right across the country, somebody in St. Albert could make it.
McDonald's and Tim Hortons.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
They're just starting.
And maybe it is too late.
I think our experience with the nonprofits is they're not entrepreneurial.
They're not, and so we have to help them.
They struggle with being entrepreneurial. So if it was something that the city was going to buy and sell and fund nonprofit, we might have better success. Or if there was another entity that was going to do it. If I gave 1,000 masks to a service club and said, here you go, sell these, keep the profits, I'd pick up the 1,000 next week. They're just, it's a difficult place for them to be in that entrepreneurial world.
Yeah, and yet they're getting hit with the same economic situation
No
that,
question.
you know, everybody's getting hit with, and they have a direct effect on the people who live in our city. So I don't know, I feel like we, you know, maybe there is a quick win in there, maybe not with PPE, maybe with something else that could be part of a recovery.
But could we throw an RFP out? Could we put an RFP in the paper?
I could be wrong, but I think that in order to sell PPE, it has to fit certain criteria. And the people that are making it at home and selling their little masks and you put your coffee filter inside doesn't meet that standard. So I think that if we're going to be
right
doing it, there's a lot more than just talking to a sewer down the road.
Yeah, I wasn't so much thinking of a source, but I agree.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just think that there are ways that people are thinking about these things in our community. Did you have something to say?
Well, that was a good segue. So I sit on the St. Albert Seniors Advisory Committee, and this is year 2 of a committee that's just coming to life. And what's interesting, and I attended the last meeting and I arrived a little bit late, but discovered very quickly that there is a real sense among that demographic that there's going to be a loss. They've sort of had an opportunity for a gain, and that there's been some curbside pickup opportunities. There's been businesses adjusting their hours to accommodate them. And there is some real fear and anxiety that that is going to disappear. So as we talk about things opening up and everybody wanting to rush out, there's a group that's not wanting to rush out. They're holding back and they're concerned. And I have to say I was a little surprised because I don't necessarily reside entirely in that camp. And in terms of that perspective, and in hearing it so universally that they are genuinely concerned. They felt really comfortable this last while because there's been adjustments made to accommodate. And the concern is that as we move forward, if all of that disappears, they're going to become even more isolated and reclusive in the absence of that. So they were really intentional that come to this group as an awareness, because I think they also feel that maybe that isn't abundantly clear, because the move is obviously on and there is a significant part of the population that just can't wait for the next thing to open. And I guess the balancing act is there's another demographic or another part of the population that isn't so eager or is much more concerned and will be moving at a slower pace.
And the example given was a couple who both were recovering from cancer in the last couple of years, ordered something from Michael's or something, and it's been great because everything's been curbside. And because they opened and their hours were normal, they stopped curbside. So now the expectation is that this woman and her husband need to go into the store to buy this stuff and to look around. And that is scaring them because they don't want to go, they're not comfortable. So we have to be thinking about the comfort level
Yes.
of our people,
Yeah.
our vulnerable people.
And I guess there's sort of, when you think about it, it's perpetually messaged that that's the demographic that has to be concerned. So it's being drilled in constantly, whether they feel that way personally or not, they're hearing it almost daily, that they're in that demographic and they have to be concerned. So when you talk about new businesses, you almost picture somebody that says, I'm willing to do that for you. And you want something from Michael's, I'll pick it up and here's my small handling fee. And they jump at something like that. Because I think there are people that are sort of saying, and I have heard this, that until there's a vaccine, I'm staying as close to home as I can. Will you start to project that out? Are you staying home for a year? Because that's what it could mean. And maybe that is really how they're thinking. So it fits somewhere in that grand scheme of the balancing act that we have, trying to honor a little bit of everybody in all of this.
I wonder if there's opportunity for volunteerism.
There is.
Because, we've talked about a lot of businesses and a lot of people want to volunteer. They don't know how or
There's been lots of increase queries about where can I volunteer, I'm not working, but when people go back to work, that's going to be a little bit again.
One of the things that I think is a bit masked right now is our unemployment. So as SERV runs out, it's a 16-week program. And then you have CEWS, which runs out in August. And I think businesses and organizations in all sectors are going to hit the rubber because they're not going to rebound. They may not make the short term by December be viable. And we may, and if they open, they may not require the same number of people to deliver service. And so I think the unemployment we're going to get hammered here probably in the fall is going to be very different. And I think there's I don't know what the answer is, but I think there's an opportunity around, from a strength-based approach in St. Albert, like where are the employment opportunities? And we heard that people are going to be thinking about their employment and looking for change. And can you look at it from a strength-based approach as opposed to all of these layoffs and business closes? Because I think there are businesses that are going to be thriving, whether it's in the industrial heartland or we are going to be seeing growth in some sectors in different spaces. So how can we support that aspect? Because I think that's a wave that we have yet to hit.
Well, just leveraging off that, and sorry, Mayor, I know closing, but it filters back into the social side of things. We can't lose sight of the social side. If you look at, fortunately, I think the food bank did a great job with others help them out on fundraising. But you take a look at some of these other context services, they're going to be probably some strapped for resources that they aren't already. And so that's maybe something we should all, as a takeaway, go what and networks community we're in to help support those and look at some fundraising opportunities. I don't know, again, I'm just kind of speak here, but take a look what the TED was able to do with food bank. We may not be drawing in or a group like that through our network or other nonprofits that are either starving for resources dollar-wise or services.
All right, sorry we ran late. We're at the end, right? I can do it. So we are moving, I think, to 40 meetings next week.
Yeah.
Awesome. So for June 24th, I guess the only homework is to just kind of continue to keep your eyes and ears open. But idea generation to bring, so Edmonton is doing community gardens as a way to connect people and providing gardens. We haven't really talked about how the city of St. Albert can financially incentivize or provide breaks or grants or whatever. I know Edmonton puts the money into it. I'm not sure if it's supported right now, but it's not off the table. So whatever you guys do, you guys have.
Thank you. Thanks, Trish.